The room is finally quiet, your body has surrendered to the mattress, and then your mind opens a door into a life that does not exist anywhere except behind your closed eyes. Suddenly you are explaining yourself to someone who never understood you, receiving an apology that never came, or walking into a room where everyone finally recognizes what they once ignored. Sometimes the scene is beautiful enough to delay sleep willingly, while other nights it becomes a disaster rehearsal in which one small uncertainty grows into an entire future collapsing around you. You change the dialogue, adjust the expressions, replace the ending, and run the scene again until every person behaves exactly as reality refused to let them behave. From the outside, this may look like ordinary overthinking, but from the inside, it often feels like the only hour when your unfinished emotions are finally allowed to speak without interruption. Your mind is not creating these stories because it has nothing better to do. It is creating them because something important was felt, needed, feared, or silenced before the lights went out. Every imaginary conversation carries an emotional invoice, and every repeated ending is your mind asking you to notice a cost that daylight helped you postpone. The important question is therefore not whether the scenario is real, but what real need keeps borrowing imaginary characters to make itself visible. Once you learn to identify that need, the stories become less mysterious, and you can stop treating your imagination like an enemy that attacks you for no reason. Tonight, we are going to decode 4 kinds of stories people repeatedly build before sleep, why each one appears, and how to hear its message without sacrificing the rest your body needs. The first story is the courtroom, where your mind gathers every person who dismissed, embarrassed, betrayed, or misunderstood you, and finally places them in front of the evidence. Perhaps a friend made a cutting joke at dinner, and you laughed with everyone else, because defending yourself would have made the room uncomfortable. Hours later, beneath the blanket, you deliver the answer that protects your dignity, and this time the table becomes silent because everyone understands exactly how far they crossed the line. The fantasy is rarely about winning an argument as much as it is about recovering the self-respect you temporarily abandoned to keep the peace. During the day, social pressure rewards speed, politeness, and emotional control, so your honest response often arrives only after your nervous system no longer feels watched. That delayed clarity can feel humiliating because you judge your past self with information and courage that were unavailable in the original moment. Your nighttime courtroom corrects this imbalance by giving you unlimited time, perfect language, and an audience that cannot interrupt, leave, or twist what you meant. Yet the imaginary verdict never lasts for long, because dignity created inside a private scene cannot fully replace a boundary that still remains absent in your waking life. If the same person keeps appearing night after night, your mind may not be asking for a sharper comeback. It may be asking whether you will continue accepting the same treatment tomorrow. The useful message inside the courtroom is not that you must reopen every old conflict, but that some part of you wants acknowledgement, protection, or a clean ending. You can begin decoding it by completing one sentence on paper. What I needed in that moment, but did not receive, was something I still deserve to name clearly. The answer might be respect, safety, honesty, an apology, or simply permission to walk away without proving your pain to anyone. The second story is the stage, where you become unusually magnetic, accomplished, admired, or unforgettable in front of people who barely noticed you in real life. In this story, you publish the work everyone overlooked, return to your hometown transformed, or speak with such confidence that even the people who underestimated you cannot look away. It is easy to dismiss this as vanity, yet many fantasies of applause begin not with an oversized ego, but with a long history of feeling emotionally invisible. When effort receives little recognition, imagination creates an audience, not always because you need worship, but because you need proof that your existence leaves an impression somewhere. The stage can also reveal ambitions you have trained yourself to minimize, because wanting something deeply exposes you to disappointment, judgment, and the possibility of failure. Inside the scene, no application is rejected, no creative risk becomes embarrassing, and no one asks why you believed you were capable of more. That certainty delivers temporary relief, but it can quietly become a substitute for the vulnerable actions through which real confidence is actually built. There is a crucial difference between a fantasy that points you toward your values and one that rewards you so completely that you never take the first uncomfortable step. If you imagine being praised for writing, ask whether you have written anything this week. If you imagine being chosen, ask where you have allowed yourself to be seen. The goal is not to shame the fantasy, because the fantasy may contain an honest map of the life you want, but have been too cautious to pursue. Your task is to remove the imaginary audience and examine what remains, because the part that still matters without applause is usually the desire worth carrying into tomorrow. The stage story becomes useful when you convert one dramatic victory into one modest action that reality can actually support within the next 24 hours. Sending one message, practicing for 15 minutes, or showing unfinished work to one trustworthy person may feel unimpressive, but it moves your identity beyond the walls of imagination. Real self-belief rarely arrives as a grand internal speech. It grows when your behavior repeatedly provides evidence that you are willing to participate in your own life. The third story is the bunker, where your mind races ahead of tomorrow and constructs emergencies so detailed that worrying begins to feel like responsible preparation. You imagine missing an important train, freezing during a presentation, receiving a frightening phone call, or watching one awkward conversation destroy a relationship you value. Then you prepare explanations, escape routes, backup plans, and emotional armor for events that have not happened and may never happen at all. This form of imagining offers a powerful illusion. If you can suffer through the future in advance, perhaps the real future will no longer have the ability to surprise you. The problem is that the body often reacts to vividly imagined danger as a meaningful signal, even when the threat exists only as a possibility being rehearsed in darkness. Your muscles tighten, your breathing becomes shallow, and the exhaustion that brought you to bed is replaced by the alertness you would need if something were actually wrong. The bunker story therefore confuses vigilance with safety, because it keeps you prepared for impact while preventing the recovery that would help you respond intelligently tomorrow. Useful planning ends with a decision, a calendar entry, or a concrete next step, whereas anxious rehearsal keeps generating new branches after every practical answer has already been found. You can test the difference by asking whether the thought is producing information you can use, or merely producing another version of the same fear. If there is a useful action, write it down and assign it a time. If there is no action available tonight, continued rehearsal is not preparation, but repeated exposure to uncertainty. The deeper need beneath the bunker is usually not prediction, because no mind can guarantee the future, but trust that you will be able to meet the future without knowing everything first. The fourth story is the doorway, where you enter an alternate relationship, identity, or life that feels more emotionally accurate than the one waiting outside your bedroom. You may imagine being loved by someone who barely knows you, living in another city, belonging to a different circle, or becoming the version of yourself who never hesitates. It is showing you a possible self, often one that carries needs you have labeled unrealistic, selfish, embarrassing, or too late to pursue. The imagined person may symbolize tenderness rather than romance, while the imagined city may represent freedom rather than a literal place you must immediately move toward. This matters because taking every fantasy literally can create reckless decisions, but dismissing every fantasy as meaningless can hide information about a life that no longer fits. Ask what emotional quality the doorway gives you that your current routine does not, then look for a grounded way to create a small amount of that quality while awake. If the fantasy gives you adventure, change one predictable part of your week. If it gives you warmth, risk one honest conversation with someone emotionally safe. The point is not to reproduce the dream exactly, but to stop forcing imagination to carry needs that your waking life never receives permission to express. These four stories explain what your mind may be seeking, but they do not yet explain why the stories become loudest precisely when you most desperately want silence. Daylight gives attention somewhere to go, because messages, traffic, work, entertainment, and other people continually interrupt the emotional material waiting beneath the surface. When the room becomes dark and external demands disappear, there is less competition for your attention, so feelings that seemed quiet can suddenly become impossible to ignore. Fatigue also makes deliberate redirection more difficult, which means the mind may drift more freely between memory, imagination, threat, desire, and unfinished social moments. This does not mean that one brain region has simply turned off while another has taken control, because the real transition into sleep is more complicated than that tidy explanation. It means your usual filters are less effective, the environment is less distracting, and emotionally charged material has a clearer stage on which to appear. Repetition then teaches the brain an association. because if you build stories in the same bed every night, the bed can gradually become a cue for mental activity rather than sleep. The scenario also provides an immediate emotional shift, replacing boredom, loneliness, or helplessness with drama, purpose, comfort, or the temporary sensation of control. That reward makes the behavior easy to repeat, even when the long-term cost is frustration, shortened sleep, and a mind that feels increasingly difficult to guide. Eventually, you are not only awake because you are imagining, you are also imagining because you are awake. And each side of the loop gives the other more time to continue. Not every bedtime scenario is harmful, however, and treating all imagination as pathology can create unnecessary fear around a normal human capacity. A brief rehearsal that produces a useful insight and then releases you may be adaptive, especially when you are preparing for a meaningful conversation or creative task. The pattern becomes more concerning when it feels compulsory, repeatedly delays sleep, intensifies distress, replaces real action, or consumes substantial time during the day as well. Ask 4 questions. Did I choose to begin? Can I choose to stop? Does this create a useful next step? And how does my body feel when the scene ends? If you begin intentionally, finish naturally, learn something, and remain physically calm, the imagination is probably functioning more like a workshop than a trap. If the scene starts automatically, resists interruption, produces no new information, and leaves your body activated, you are more likely caught in rumination rather than rehearsal. This distinction matters because the solution is not to destroy a powerful imagination, but to prevent a useful instrument from taking control of the hour reserved for recovery. The first way to do that is to capture the message before trying to close the scene, because a mind that feels ignored often repeats itself with greater urgency. Keep a small notebook outside the bed and write only 3 things: the scene, the feeling beneath it, and one action that belongs to daylight. A courtroom scene might become a boundary to consider, a stage scene might become a creative step, a bunker scene might become a scheduled plan, and a doorway scene might become a neglected need. Keep the note brief, because turning bedtime into a long journal session can accidentally teach the mind that the bed is still a workplace for emotional investigation. The second method is to create a daytime appointment for unresolved thinking, ideally earlier in the evening and away from the place where you sleep. During that appointment, review what you captured, separate solvable problems from emotional pain, and decide which items need action, acceptance, conversation, or time. This gives your mind a credible promise that the issue will not be abandoned, while also making it clear that midnight is not the only available meeting time. The third method is to calm the body before debating the story, because an activated nervous system rarely becomes peaceful simply because it receives a clever argument. Let your exhale become slightly longer than your inhale. Soften the muscles around your jaw and eyes, and feel the weight of your body being held by the mattress. You are not trying to force sleep, which often creates more pressure, but reducing the physical signal that tells the mind an emergency is still in progress. The fourth method is to change the relationship with the image instead of shouting at it to disappear, because forceful suppression can sometimes make a thought return with greater intensity. Picture the scene becoming smaller, slower, and less vivid, then give it a deliberately ordinary ending in which the characters leave and the room returns to silence. If the same memory repeatedly carries strong shame or fear, imagine your present self entering the scene to offer protection, perspective, or the boundary your earlier self could not access. The fifth method is to protect the bed-sleep connection by leaving the bed briefly when you remain awake and frustrated for a prolonged period. Move to a dim, quiet place, do something calm and uninteresting, and return only when sleepiness begins to replace the urge to solve your entire life. This may feel inconvenient, but it stops the mattress from becoming the arena where wakefulness, pressure, and mental performance are practiced every night. Consistency matters more than perfection, because a habit built across months will not disappear after one peaceful evening or one successfully interrupted story. Some nights the courtroom will reopen, the stage lights will rise, the bunker alarm will sound, or the doorway will tempt you with a more beautiful life. When that happens, do not accuse yourself of failing. Identify the story, name the need, save one message for daylight, and return your attention gently to the body. If the pattern causes persistent insomnia, severe distress, or major disruption to daily life, consider speaking with a qualified mental health or sleep professional, rather than carrying the problem alone. Your imagination is not evidence that you are weak, dramatic, or broken. because it may be the language your mind learned when direct expression did not feel safe or possible. But a language deserves translation, not unlimited authority, and every scene must eventually hand its message back to the life that created it. The purpose is not to win every imaginary argument, survive every imaginary disaster, or become irresistible to every imaginary audience before you are allowed to rest. The purpose is to understand what the story protects. Take one honest step while awake, and let darkness become a place where nothing more is required from you. So when tonight's scene begins, ask which room you have entered: the courtroom, the stage, the bunker, or the doorway, and listen for the need hidden beneath the scenery. Then remind yourself that you do not have to finish an entire life inside your head before morning, because some answers can wait for a rested mind and the return of daylight. If one of these 4 stories follows you most nights, share which one it is below, because naming the pattern may help someone else recognize that they are not alone inside it. And if this video gave language to an experience you could never explain, subscribe and join us as we keep uncovering the quiet psychology behind the moments no one else can see.